Hey folks, Attorney Sharif Silmi. I'm glad that to join you all, and this will be obviously the last live that we're going to have in 2024. We have a lot of things to talk about. It's been in the world of immigration an interesting year. I think the most important event was obviously the elections, in which Donald Trump was elected to his second term in office that will begin this coming month. January 20th is the inauguration date. And we're thinking about what sort of, changes might occur, what might happen. And in the midst of that, we see a huge controversy that has boiled up to the surface as it relates in particular to Indian nationals who are in the United States on H-1B visas. We've seen lots of vitriol, lots of hatred, lots of negativity in this regard. And it's quite unfortunate, and in fact comes from a place of, I would frankly say, evil, because the kind of things that we're seeing are not really about policy differences. Rather, they're attacks on cultural grounds, on people's way of life, things of that sort. So and frankly speaking, this is nothing new when we look at American history. The United States has always had a controversy as it related to whether or not folks who arrive newly into the country belong and whatnot. One of my favorite books, I brought it with me. This is actually the young readers version. I grabbed my daughter's copy, but this is a great book for folks to consider. It's called A Different Mirror, A History of Multicultural America. And I think everybody, particularly those of you who are immigrants into the United States, should definitely pick up this book and read it and give your kids a copy of it. One of the things that you'll find is that throughout US history, there's always been a resentment towards individuals who come in groups to the United States. This was true of Italians, it was true of the Irish, it was true of Germans, it was true certainly of Middle Eastern people, it's been true of Chinese, it's been true of almost every group that has come into the United States. There's always been a major pushback, and we've seen where political forces have sort of entered that space to then start controversy around it and capitalize on it politically. And this is a huge part of the MAGA movement, which is now coming into power. So, while I think people have been comforting themselves in terms of saying, well, it's not going to affect us because, Trump is only concerned with, so-called illegal immigrants, people who enter the United States without inspection and are claiming humanitarian relief, such as asylum. It's not really the case. I think that you're going to see there's a whole system that will come into place that targets folks based on this sort of nativism of hatred of the other. And where I think this could impact folks on the H-1B visa in particular can be with things like that are relatively simple, like when renewing their H-1B visa might run into a lot of RFEs, and they might empower the agencies to sort of give a lot more scrutiny to these kinds of applications. And because at the end of the day, it's not going to be micromanaged by people like Elon Musk or even Trump himself. Rather, you have folks who are going to be in power in the administration who are clearly nativists. Stephen Miller comes to mind, and now I can't remember her name right now, the North Dakota governor who's going to be coming into Homeland Security. I mean, these are essentially white nationalists who are, very concerned about what they perceive to be, people changing the racial or cultural composition of the United States, and that's something that we need to be wary of. So, I wanted to read just one section of this with regard to um, something that was reported in the Los Angeles Times in 1893. 1893. Chinese workers become targets of white labor resentment. White men and women who desire to earn a living, reported the Los Angeles Times in 1893, have for some time been entering quiet protests against vineyardists and packers employing Chinese in preference to whites. Those protests soon became violent. Economic depression led to brutal anti Chinese riots by unemployed white workers throughout California. Immigrants from China were beaten, shot, and loaded onto trains and shipped out of town. Ethnic hostility in the mines, factories, and fields forced thousands of Chinese into self employment. They opened stores, restaurants, and especially laundries. Many chose laundry work because it was easier and less expensive to open laundry than to start other businesses. And this sort of created that whole ecosystem of small business entrepreneur among the Chinese population. And this all stemmed from that sort of white nationalist hatred. And, we see similar things that have happened to the Italians, that happened to the Irish. And so those in the Indian community who are concerned or feel like they're being specifically targeted here, I would just tell you that this is par for the course. This is some element of this has always existed in American society. And, those are definitely going to be present. I mean, just speaking personally, my grandfather came to the United States in the 1950s. We've had even his older brother was here earlier than that in 1920. And to this day, whenever, there's been some interactions, somebody, wants to maybe road rage or something, and they see that, we're of different ethnicity and non-white, they'll say, go back to your country. So it's nothing new. And we have to be, aware of this and how we, operate and not be naive to it. I mean, certainly it helps to be in areas where you don't have that, like metropolitan areas like Washington, D.C., Maryland, Baltimore, New York, California, Bay Area, Los Angeles. I mean, you have definitely more of a multicultural environment in those areas, and you have a much, I think, more understanding populations. However, even then in some of the suburbs or the outer suburbs, there are very much pockets of racism that are sort of, boiling up to the surface. And, things are relatively okay from an economic perspective presently. However, if you start to see greater economic pressure upon particularly working class white Americans, that kind of hatred will manifest even further. So it's something that we have to be aware of and be cognizant of. So I wanted to pull up some of the discussion that has been going on so that we can kind of take a look at it and analyze it. And then I'm going to kind of talk about some solutions as well for those of you who are in a H-1B scenario and how we can kind of overcome that. So there are, so for example, this all started recently in the what we used to call the Twitter sphere, but on X, where one of the popular MAGA supporters had said basically to Elon, addressing Elon Musk, stop trying to optimize something that shouldn't exist, referring to the H-1B visas. And then, there was a back and forth about that. And then Vivek Ramaswamy wrote a really, I think, interesting post that received huge sort of discussion. It had over 115 million views, wherein he talked about how Tech companies often hire foreign-born first-generation engineers over quote-unquote Native Americans because of essentially the culture of work in the United States, and that basically American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for too long. And he sort of, gives a critique of U.S. culture and, its veneration for the sort of jock over the studious character, and, so on and so forth, and how the culture has sort of, made mediocrity or celebrated mediocrity in a way. So, this I think is interesting analysis. I think that, it's problematic in a sense because it does sort of define the idea of immigrants as being a solution to a problem rather than a opportunity and benefit for the U.S. Because if we look at U.S. history, I think what we have to ask a serious question is, who does the country really belong to? And, is it something that is only exclusive to a particular group? Whereas, I would argue that no, it's not. It's something that belongs to, all cultures and people of diverse backgrounds. That's why we talk about a multicultural America, where it is a tolerant nation of different kinds of people who all come together. Of course, the first Americans were the native population of tribes and peoples who were here and were essentially decimated. And then Africans were brought against their will. You had white settlers, but those were not the only group in the very beginning. So that's something that I think, folks need to understand very well, and that there's no exclusivity to what it means to be American. There were, Indian workers laying down the breadbasket of the United States in the Central Valley of California, probably before a lot of these so-called white American even arrived in the United States, because their ancestors were most probably coming in the late 19th century or early 20th century, whereas you had Indian farm workers here, even before that in the mid to late 1800s. So again, I don't want to go too much into that scenario, but this is just an extremely important point to make. Now, looking at what we have going on, and particularly where Trump has mentioned that the H-1B program is great, I wouldn't put too much stock in this necessarily, because if you read between the lines, he was actually referring to the H-2B program. That's the one he's actually leveraged. So that's one thing to be aware of. And then the other thing is, any kind of serious changes to immigration policy will have to, receive support, at least from the Republican Party. And we don't know that this is going to be, that likely, that there's going to be consensus even among Republicans in terms of protecting the H-1B program or making it easy for foreign workers to remain and work in the United States. It's still sort of unclear at this point. However, it's something we, are going to need to be aware of. So, and I'm having a little trouble with my camera, but just hang in there. So it's something, again, that we're going to continue to be very much, aware of in terms of our approach to the situation. So this is why I love doing live, because you get all of these wonderful kind of situations. And there we go. I think we should be good now. So it's something that we want to be aware of in terms of the risks and potentials. So one interesting area, and I don't know if so. This isn't the article I'm looking for. So here we go. A majority of migrant workers employed with H-1B visas are paid below median wages. So this is actually really interesting. I mean, I think that you do have a lot of U.S. corporations who have been taking advantage of foreign-born workers, and that's not their fault. That's the fault of the employers themselves. That is why it is important for us to continue to focus on self-petition uh, pathways for those of you who are in the United States, who are in a situation where you're dependent on your employer. You see that large tech firms, including groups like Amazon, Google, Microsoft, are using the program to their detriment. And that is not going to be something that is, going to be helpful. So we're definitely, okay, we're losing the video stream again. Actually, I think I can probably fix that by going to a different video altogether. Well, okay, it's gonna be a bit messy here, but we'll just continue. So when we're thinking about how to approach our case, what we want to do, your overall situation as it relates to immigration, what we want to do is to make sure that you are putting yourself in a position where you're not depending on these companies. They are clearly going to capitalize on your labor and make sure that you are put into a situation where you're not able to really truly benefit from your work. And those of you who have taken matters in your own hands, we have seen huge impact just within our own firm on people's lives, and making sure that they're not necessarily involved. I mean, I was just speaking to one client of mine who received a EB-1A approval earlier in 2024, earlier this year, and now he's working on a startup, a really interesting startup. So those kinds of things are happening, and it is really, really amazing that we are kind of headed in that sort of direction. Actually, this is one of the articles I was hoping to share with you. So American tech giants are banking on H-1B visas like never before. And it's not necessarily the Infosys or the Tata consultancies that are holding, are increasing numbers of the H-1Bs. Rather, it is the major American technology companies that are, in fact, doing that. So those of you who are in the, Meta, Amazon, even groups like the, Elon Musk owned companies, we are definitely here and are encouraging you to take matters into your own hands and not to, rely solely on the H-1B scenario. So, I think with regard, there's a question about EB-2 NIW and whether that will be directly or indirectly impacted by the new administration. I mean, I think that it's possible that there will be some impact, although what I can tell you is the main data point that we can look to would be the 2016 to 2020 period under Trump. And during that period, we had a very high success rate as it related to EB-2 national interest waiver. The good thing about EB-2 national interest waiver is that it's based on case law, not on statute. So the analysis as it relates to national interest waiver is based on a case called Danisar, DHANSAR, Danisar. And under the Danisar analysis, in order for one to qualify for a national interest waiver, you need to have a master's degree or an alternative, which is could be demonstrating exceptional ability, which requires meeting 3 of 10 criteria, or a combination of education and experience that is progressive. I don't want to go into details. Then you have to show 3 main things. First, that you have a prospective endeavor or a proposed endeavor that is of national importance and has substantial merit, that you're well positioned to engage that particular endeavor, and that you pass a balance test. And the balance test is actually where you look at whether or not your role is going to be, or that your proposed endeavor is going to benefit US workers rather than harm US workers, or at least not harm US workers to a degree that offsets the benefit that you're going to bring about to the area of national importance that you're serving. So that's something that, I don't think is going to be negatively impact in a huge way. The one thing that is possible, which again, I think it'll be modified rather than removed, is that during the Biden administration, there was a policy memorandum that made national interest waiver cases more favorable if they were in a STEM related field. And, so that was a Biden policy. And you have seen a situation, a reactionary policy process where things that are just done by Biden or the previous administration, rather, would be taken away or kind of, dismantled. So, that's a possibility and then replaced with something else. Like you remember NAFTA was replaced by USMCO. So it's essentially the same agreement, just has a different name. So I think you could kind of see things like that, like new policies that are pretty much similar. However, they're called something else. So long story short, I don't think that, national interest waiver program would be negatively impacted per se. So, looking at this just in terms of the data, so the use of H-1B visas by Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Apple surged by 189%, with Amazon leading at a 478% increase. Meta was second with 244, and then Google 137%. In contrast, firms like TCS, Wipro, Infosys, HCL cut their H-1B reliance by 56%. It's really interesting. And I think a lot of that has to do with the growing middle class in India as an alternative, in terms of the rising wages that we see. So that's, in India. So I think that the US is going to not really play around here. I think they understand really clearly that, China is and in fact, India, is a serious competitor economically, especially in the technology space. So if, all of the bright minds in, science and technology and math are, no longer going to be welcome in the US, at least newer arrivals, then that's going to have serious economic and strategic consequences for the country. So again, I think that, they're probably going to avoid that. However, there will be practical challenges in, the messiness with which, policy does arise. And, there's going to be a power tug of war within the MAGA movement. You have folks like, I would say, the Vivek and the Elon Musk side of the MAGA movement who understand the importance of, highly skilled individuals remaining and entering the US in increasing numbers, as a sort of a nationalist view of their competition with foreign adversaries, and frankly speaking, to, benefit and profit off of, from a business perspective. And then you have the sort of, Steve Bannon, wing of the MAGA movement, who are, and Stephen Miller wing, who are sort of just white nationalist in their orientation and seek to, basically, subscribe to this theory of like, foreigners are coming to replace the white population and what have you. So, there's going to be a tug of war, I think. So we have to be aware of that. And the best thing of all is to not rely on these visas for you and your family's, welfare. Don't be sort of kind of held hostage by the sort of, instability of the administration. Rather, what you ought to do is think about how you can overcome all of these challenges through a self-petition scenario. Those of you who are aware of, the EB-1A visa, it, is a great tool. We've seen huge numbers of approval and success rate for us at Selmy Law in 2024 was record breaking. We're just, really churning out those approvals. It's been, a great sort of period, for us. And we don't anticipate that changing. And to the degree that we need to make adjustments in our approach, we certainly are capable of doing that. I mean, we did review the data, as I mentioned, from 2016 to 2020, and the approval rate there was very strong. So that's gonna, I think, do really well. Um, the one thing I would say is in other areas, like for example, adjustment of status, we might see more delays. You might have, for example, there was one issue, which was that during the 2016 to 2020 period, they did require interviews at the time of adjustment of status. So that's something that's going to be different from what we're used to in the present moment. Although they tried to do it and then they waived most of the interviews, to be honest with you. So we got to look at that. The other, and there's another question here regarding how long do you take to file an EB1A application if the case is ready, and do you have a refund policy? So with regard to how long does it take, first of all, you don't know if your case is ready. I mean, it may be ready to you, but when I review a case, I have very high standards. That's why our cases get approved. We do our internal RFE checks. We make sure that the case is going to be approved before it's sent to USCIS. We don't compromise our approval rating because somebody has a subjective view that their case is ready. We want to make sure that it's ready according to our standards. So your case may be ready, it may not be ready. It's something we'd have to analyze and take a look at. That's why you probably need a consultation to determine what your scenario is. Now, hypothetically speaking, if a case is, I mean, I'll just tell you generally, here's how I look at it, right? You probably need, if somebody's starting from zero, then, you need 1 month of, I would say, strategy sessions. That's where I will work with a client on a one-on-one basis to think about how do we develop the case strategy. And this is true for NIW, it's true for EB1A, it's true for other categories of immigration, that are complex. And we want to know, okay, how are we going to approach this case? That's going to be a very important point. And let's go into the details of the details of the details so that we compartmentalize each and every aspect of the case. We figure out all the evidence that we're going to need, what kind of witness testimony statements are going to be needed, what kind of evidence does the person have, what kind of accomplishments, what kind of contributions they've made. And then we're analyzing that and developing a uniquely tailored case for their particular situation. So the developing strategy, I think, could take up to a month. Sometimes it could take longer depending on the circumstances. Then you have a period of collecting the evidence, optimizing the evidence, reviewing the evidence, perhaps collecting more evidence. And this is a case-by-case situation. You really don't know how long that could take. It could take very long. It could not take long at all. It just depends on the situation. The other aspect of it is going to be that we have then collected all the evidence. We've optimized the evidence. Everything is looking beautiful. The third and final phase of an EB1A process is going to be preparation and submission of the legal brief itself. Now, for that, with changes and with review and what have you, it could take, I would say, a month or so. So according to the questioner, how long is the case going to take if the case is ready, quote unquote? If in fact the case is ready, meaning the evidence has been collected, it's been reviewed, it's optimized, we're certain that the evidence is strong and we don't need any additional evidence. From that point to the point where the case is ready, we could do it within a month, possibly less, depending on the circumstances and the legal necessity. But again, I would be wary if one is self-determining that their case is ready without fully understanding the legal requirements and the level of scrutiny applied to such cases. So I would be sort of careful about that in terms of what is needed. So again, just coming back to this controversy over the H-1B scenario, I hope, I know, like, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety from people who have contacted us and asked us, like, what's going on? Why is this happening? Why are they speaking like that? It's nothing new. I mean, this is America. I mean, it's a big country with a lot of different opinions. But I would say the loud minority of people are the ones with that vitriol and hatred. I think if you look at the vast majority of Americans, they love the idea of hardworking people who are smart and efficient and determined and, making contributions to their community and their society, being a part of the, fabric of the country. In fact, I think probably the best thing that could happen to any American is for someone who is well educated from India or from any other country, Pakistan, from Middle East, from Africa, to move to their neighborhood, working in a great job in the technology industry or as an engineer, as a highly skilled person, and have their children become friends with your children, because those are going to be the best influence that those folks have in their lives. And this is something that I can't remember his name, but one of the great journalists had mentioned regarding that particular situation. So for non-STEM students who are early in their PhD in general, what types of evidence would you recommend to focus heavily on collecting as they prepare for an EB1A application after 4 years? First of all, you may not need to wait 4 years to file an NIW application, particularly if you're doing a PhD after a master's. So I would just say that you probably need an individual consultation to determine the exact facts of your case. However, just if I could speak generally about it, I would say that the types of evidence you need would depend on if you have any professional background. If you've worked in industry, then definitely there's going to be a lot of evidence that you could gather regarding your work-related contributions. If you haven't worked in industry, then you got to take an academic approach. And then perhaps you've done some thought leadership exercises, participation in conferences, for example, things of that nature. So it really depends on your area of study, and what you're doing and what field you're in, and whether or not you have professional experiences. For example, are there licenses in your area? Are there, things like that? Have you published any material? Certainly witnesses are key. So, the more contacts and networking that you do, particularly among experts, that would be, I think, great. One thing I could tell you, I've seen people sort of rely on expert letters that are sort of, they're paid experts, if you will, and they follow this structure that kind of looks like an immigration petition. I think these are not very persuasive with the adjudicators, because I would rather see, as an adjudicator, putting my feet in the shoes of the adjudicator, I would rather see an expert letter that is sort of natural, like talking about the person's work and their capacity and their capabilities from sort of a narrative that is, specific to the individual and their knowledge of the individual's work, rather than structuring it within what looks like an immigration petition and having a lot of the same kind of repeated language. In fact, in the case law and in the adjudication manual itself, it does specify that where an individual testimony uses language that is present in the statute, it is a sort of a negative point on a person's application. So this is something that folks need to be aware of. I mean, you need to understand that there are lots of things. It's not always what you do, it's also what you don't do that matters in terms of your petition, whether it's, regardless of what kind of self-petition. So if I can somehow share my screen one more time, there is here a very important sort of language about letters of support in evidentiary considerations. And this is true in EB1A and national interest waiver. And what it talks about is that, first of all, so when it comes to letters of support, they should explain in specific terms why the witness believes the beneficiary to be of a caliber of person with extraordinary ability. Here we go. Letters that merely reiterate USCIS's definitions relating to the classification or make general or an expansive statements regarding the beneficiary and the beneficiary's accomplishments are not persuasive. They're not persuasive. So that is one thing that we need to understand here, is that these kinds of, par for the course, sort of doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting that it's going to be okay just because, my cousin 13 years ago did this and was able to get approved. It's not going to work anymore. You have to have a very sophisticated approach to gain acceptance in any kind of self-petition. And that is what we're specializing in. That's what we are focusing on. We are focusing on cases which it's not only about the individual's profile, it's also about the approach that the individual has taken to their career and the approach we will take in presenting their case in a persuasive manner to make sure that it's done through natural evidence, evidence that is authentic. Authenticity is the most important aspect of an immigration petition. Gone are the days where paid media or paid for consultation letters are going to matter in an immigration proceeding. You need natural contacts. You need to foster those relationships and leverage them in a way that's going to be beneficial. So I would, again, you have research. This is another question, research, assistantship, conferences, co-authored publications. I don't think you should wait 4 years. I think you're probably receiving incorrect guidance. And if you are able to reach out to us, sellmelaw.com, I would schedule a paid full consultation. Don't waste your time. We could definitely help guide you, and I'll meet with you directly and talk to you about your case and how we can get it done. Because here's the other thing. Through that guidance, let's say you say, you know what? I cut it down from 4 years to 2 years. How valuable is 2 years of your life? Is it worth a paid consultation? I sure hope so. So let's think about that in a strategic manner and not just sort of, rely on talk in forums or things that don't really matter for the purpose of, figuring out the immigration work. So overall, we need to understand that the kind of things that are happening with regard to the news of the day is something that, we have to sort of put on mute, put on block, and focus on you and your family and how we get you beyond the current sort of, temporary risky status, because it's not just about government policy. It's also about economics and where, there's going to be a slowdown, or where maybe automation or AI will come in and sort of decimate certain aspects of, workforce in technology. I mean, if you're working in AI, you're like training your replacement here. So you need to be careful about that. These are things that are going to happen. It's really important to self-petition while you have that opportunity. So let's make sure that we're taking advantage of this and just looking at these sorts of, situations that allow us to, benefit from the overall aspect. So I hope this was helpful. We had a little bit of technology glitch, but I think overall we understand that, the kinds of things that are taking place are going to be risky to those who remain in a temporary immigration situation. And the best way to deal with this is to have a 100% clear approach that depends on your authentic view of evidence. This, gentleman is asking about a refund policy. I'm actually going to address that. No, I don't have a refund policy, because what I do have is an extremely sophisticated and sound approach of authentically presenting evidence. And we will work our butts off to present the absolute best case. And we will be confident that there is no other approach, there's no other petition that could be developed stronger than what we are able to develop for you. If you want the absolute best representation, the most authentic representation, the best presented evidence, and the best presented case, that's what we offer. We're not going to spend months and months or hours, dozens and dozens and dozens of hours on your case to give you a refund. If we take your case, we're going to tell you what the situation is, what the likelihood of success is, what you need to do in order to meet that standard. We do have situations where we include, response to requests for evidence or a resubmission if necessary. Most of the time, obviously, 90% of the time, the cases are approved, or even more than that. Where there is denial, we will do and work on a resubmission if that's part of the agreement. But ultimately, we are going to prepare the absolute best case for you, and that's what you get with us. So thank you all. I hope everybody out there has a safe and happy New Year, and hopefully we will hear from you all soon and continue to provide you the very best uniquely tailored approach to your immigration situation.